abrasions, but that will actually polish it. And so it'll clean off any minor scratches. It will allow some of the future processes to work a little bit better. And so you might do this, you might not. My strong suggestion is steel wool. But you might be in a hurry, or you might be like, I want to push how plastic this medium is. I know it sounds like plastic, but I mean how the verb, is that a verb? It's an adjective.
Flexible.
Flexible, how flexible it is. And that's on video, great. So the next step is these little old pieces of felt that have been sacrificed. They haven't been sacrificed by students. The people who cut our felt sent them to us. You get to use something called Putz pomade. How cool is that? All right, this is actually the material they use in commercial printing to polish intaglio plates, because this is how your dollar bill is printed, even to this day. Your currency is printed intaglio style.
And on Pee Wee Herman's hair.
And what?
And on Pee Wee Herman's hair.
Different type of Putz pomade. This is basically like silver polish, and so it's used for cast type. It's used to polish movable type. So you just take a little bit out, and you can see right away the dark is where it's tarnishing. And so you might just we just reuse this felt until it gets so grimy and gross that there's nothing more to do. But you just sort of use small concentric circles, and you start to see that sort of brownish, rusty color starts to turn black. And that's because it's taking some of the zinc off and polishing it to a nice sort of crisp polish. And my suggestion again is this is plate preparation. I would do this now, but you could also do it after you've etched your plate. Like I might want to come in here now for my rabbits and bring them back up to a high polish. So there's no reason I couldn't now go back in and polish this. So rather than have you watch me do this whole plate, we got to talk about cleanup. First of all, notice I'm wearing gloves. Mainly for cleanliness, but you will want your solvent-resistant gloves for a few things, because the only way to clean this off is mineral spirits. So put a little star there. Putz pomade only comes off with mineral spirits. And why that's important is starting now with Intaglio, we are actually moving away from the oil-based inks and towards water-soluble inks, so we can clean up with just soap and water. And we're also going to start using things like vegetable oil and Windex to clean up our oil-based stuff. So we're getting away from mineral spirits for the most part, but we still will need the good old-fashioned solvent in order to take some of this stuff off. And so this mineral spirits is very greasy. The Putz pomade is very greasy. So I would always finish this last part with mineral spirits to totally get this material off, soap and water, because the solvent will break down that Putz pomade or ink or whatever oily substance is on there, but it's going to add grease to your whole plate. So if I were to run this under the tap, the water would just bead up and slide off. So soap and water a couple times, and I would even then take a paper towel and rub rubbing alcohol on it. And then be very careful to avoid touching it too much with your fingertips. So you might want to, as you're drawing, like have a piece of scratch paper to rest your hand or something, because any grease could change the plate. You don't have to worry about it like photography or something. It's not super sensitive, but just keep in mind once you degrease it, you might have to then re-degrease it from a few times, because fingerprints sometimes show up, little idiosyncratic things kind of happen. So Putz pomade, mineral spirits, cleaned it off, soap and water at the sink. I don't need to demonstrate that. A little bit of alcohol, very gently with paper towel. These paper towels aren't very hard, but it's possible if you spent like an hour polishing this to like a mirrored finish, which I don't think you need to do, but if you did, the paper towel might scratch, so there might be a little bit of dust in there or something. So now let's fast forward a little bit.
So could you use cheesecloth? Would that be softer?
You could. We are going to use a rag in this class that looks a lot like cheesecloth for inking the plate, and so I would not want anyone to then use the stuff we're using to ink to polish plates. So if you had your own cheesecloth, I would say that would work fine. or an old cotton t-shirt or something like that. But we have paper towels and they seem to work pretty well.
Cloth
So-
diapers are great for polishing.
Cloth diapers work well too. So, all right, this next step, I think I'm gonna set this aside and introduce you to our,
Do you have to take the baby out first?
Presumably that hasn't come in contact with the baby. The diaper.
So it's a clean diaper.
like, what am I missing?
Yeah, yeah.
I was thinking the weight might help.
All right, this next step you do need gloves. And here I have a plate, even though I've already etched material onto it, I know I want to etch more. So you can keep adding to these things. So you can imagine this as a freshly cleaned, putzed, and polished plate, or a plate that you've already got a design on. But what we need to do is we need to put something on this plate because the zinc will react to our etching solution. So what we essentially have to do is we have to cover it with what's called hard ground. So this kind of dark tar-like material that's dry on this plate is dry hard ground. This resists acid, just like the back of this does. But the difference is this is an enamel that you can't cut through very easily. This is a substance where we can use the same needle we used on the plastic plate to now scratch into this, but with less pressure. We don't have to physically alter the plate. Just opening it up will allow the acid to attack the open areas. And there's a great video on Canvas. That'll be your homework. If you haven't looked at it already, I would check it out. It's another Arts Mia video from the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. And it just sort of talks about different techniques. It goes through all of them, so it might be a little confusing. But it shows this idea that we have to kind of think about covering our plate with something that protects it and only drawing through the areas we want to bite.
Is it in English?
It is in English, so it's not like our Romanian monotype video. So if you notice on your step under transfer image, on the second one for zinc, it says place degreased plate on an old can or cardboard and take outside. We were using a hard ground that had lavender oil in it, and it was really stinky, great stuff, Charbonnel from France, very expensive, but it got a little fumey, and so we've switched to graphic chemical, and we don't need to go outside. At least, unless we get some complaints, I don't think we need to go outside. This is always stored in the flammable cabinet, and it is dangerous. We don't want to get this on our skin. We don't want to get it in our eyes. A little bit on your skin isn't going to be the end of the world, but we definitely don't want to eat anything with this on our fingers. And so what we'll do is we'll have a couple of these jars where instead of having it in the can, you might just come pour a little into the jar, and if it spills a little bit, that's okay. What's nice about hard ground is it can reconstitute itself. It doesn't dry permanently. So with the lid on, this will stay nice and wet, but if it even dries a little, it's not worth throwing it away. We're going to be using foam brushes, and I'd like to try to keep them as long as we can, but that said, they're very inexpensive. They fall apart pretty quickly. But instead of treating it as a one and done, I think we can treat it as a one, and let's let it dry in the flammable cabinet and try to reuse it. And so you might just dip this in a little bit. You might even take a little of the excess off. And I would wear gloves, and you want to work as fast as possible. So what I mean by that is, depending on the size of your plate, you want to try to get this in one solid stroke and try not to brush it too much. This hard ground flows really well, but if you fuss with it or use a bristle brush, which will work also, the more you brush it, the drier it gets, so the more streaks you'll get and the more accidental sort of false biting that you didn't intend to have that will show up. So I've now coated this. Everybody's asking like how much is enough. I think if you can see your image through there, that's fine. If you have an area that's really thick and it looks black, probably too much, but it's fine. I just go through now and triple check that the corners are hit while it's still wet. If the corners chip or the corners open up through the handling before we bite it, like on Wednesday, I'll show you how we can stop those corners out so this step isn't as necessary. But then this is ready to be set down and dry. And the question is, how long does it take to dry? It really depends. Depends on the humidity, it depends on how big your plate is, depends on like what thickness of this hard ground you've put onto the plate. But if it's shiny like it is now, you know it's wet. So you wouldn't want to rush anything. You gotta wait for it to dry.
It's already drying.
Yeah, it's already drying. You can see it turning matte, and partially that's because I gave it a nice thin coat. It might be worth every once in a while too, just gently shaking this up, because sometimes there is tar in here, and if it comes out and it's just like pure, like this is a nice consistency and color, but if it comes out like clear, then you know it's separated. So now we can set this aside. We can put a lid on this. Questions about that? That was pretty self-explanatory? We're all together? Okay. Imagination. We're in the future. This is a dry plate. You're not working this large, don't be freaked out, but notice it's dry. So it's dry, it looks dull. We gotta talk about how we're gonna impart our design onto
Because
this.
we're not gonna have our image on the plate like you did there.
Right, you will have a raw plate, just like the
Right,
one
like the
that
one the big
that
one
I
there.
pomaded. So if you want, I mean, I could wash this real quick with soap and water and alcohol and show you how to coat it. If you would like to see that after this demo, hang back and
Well,
I'll
you
do
said
that.
that you'll be able to see your image through it, but we won't really have an image.
Right,
to
you
see
won't have an
through
image.
it.
Now,
At this point.
great point, but there's nothing stopping you from doing your image directly on your metal plate first, dry point, just like with the plastic. Like maybe, you can't trace it because you can't see through the metal, but there's no reason you can't just actually start to draw on the plate, and then you would see your image through the hard ground. All right, so let's chat real quick about how to get the image on the plate. And so if we've got a dry plate, you've got options. Just start drawing, or just be spontaneous and just attack it, or maybe you have a drawing that you really want to use. And so we have what's called French chalk, and it is chalk. And so you're going to want to get a little bit of this, and make sure your hands are clean, because we also use this as an additive for inks, so we don't want to contaminate this with color or anything. But you might just now take a little pinch of it and put it onto, in this case, it's just a piece of copier paper. It could be the back of your drawing, but maybe you don't want to contaminate your drawing. It could be a photocopy of your drawing. And this is just like the carbon paper that maybe some of you used for the relief, but instead of using black charcoal, we're using white chalk.
You won't be able to see the black on
Right, so the white will stand out in contrast on the dry asphaltum or hard ground. And so what's kind of nice about this is it's already powdered for you. You might notice up front there's some chalk. That's like chalkboard chalk. It's really hard. It won't work well for this. So we'll want to try this and not drop it on the floor, but maybe just throw the excess away. And then set your carbon paper down. And now anything, let's see, can I borrow somebody's pencil? Oh, wait, ta-da, prepared. Then anything that you draw,
The bird again.
Yeah, can you draw another animal sometime?
Is that your birth sign or something?
it's me.
Okay.
And then my wife is the penguin, so I will draw her.
Do you draw that on all your work?
No. But my wife has thousands of these cartoons
the Where's Waldo?
that she's saving.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So now, you can see it in parts, maybe some of the extra chalk in parts. So it's not always perfect, but what's kind of nice about this is this chalk will actually kind of push into the hard ground a little bit. So even if you're kind of rough with it, like even if I wiped this off, you're like, oh no, it's all gone. If you notice, I don't want to spit on it, but if you notice, even after wiping the chalk off, you can still see a ghost of your drawing. And so it might take some eye strain, it might take some looking, but it's still there. And so what's kind of nice is then you don't have to worry about all that extra chalk. And now you would actually come in here and just, with your needle, like open that line up and start to open up the hard ground. And so anything that, if you see the silver metal showing through, it'll bite. So I'm not going to make you watch me do that whole thing, but that's essentially prepping the plate, getting it hard grounded. And the first step I would say for zinc is to etch it for like we'll talk about on Wednesday, like how long different etches do, but I'm a big fan of getting your outline on there at least, your basic contours of your design. I'd say at least 5 minutes, maybe up to 10 minutes. So if you can just imagine, like for this plate with this little girl, you can see she has a contour line all the way around her. Later I added details and textures and things like that. But the first step was I wanted my line drawing bit into the plate, so I bit that for 10 minutes. So most of those outlines are gonna show. So once it's on there, then you can repeat this process and the other processes I'm gonna show you later, infinite number of times. So you don't wanna leave the plate in the acid too long, but we'll talk about the acid later. Questions so far?
Is it a good idea to
Already dry, by the way.
to plan your drawing from line sketch up